January 3rd, 2026, 2:47 a.m. Caracas time. Explosions light up Venezuela's Fort Tiuna military complex. 30 minutes later, President Nicolas Maduro is blindfolded on the USS Iwo Jima. By sunrise, he's in a Manhattan courthouse. The UN calls it a dangerous precedent. Everyone thinks they know what comes next. China invades Taiwan. Russia grabs the Baltics. Great powers carve up spheres. But watch what actually stops them. The constraints everyone's ignoring determine everything. The CIA had someone inside Maduro's government. They tracked his security rotations. Trump gave him a final call. You have to go. An armada was offshore. Maduro stayed. 10:46 p.m., January 2nd. Trump gives the order. 150 aircraft launch from 20 bases. Venezuelan air defenses go silent. Either cyber attacks took them down, or someone opened the door from inside. By 4:29 a.m., Maduro's on a warship. 12 hours earlier, he ran a country. 80 people died according to Venezuelan authorities. 32 Cuban military personnel were killed. Trump announces the U.S. will run Venezuela. Total access to the oil. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is sworn in as interim president. But everyone knows Washington controls the transition. Russia condemns it. China calls it hegemonism. Brazil says it violates international law. France agrees. Even UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hedges carefully. Then, 48 hours later, the conversation shifts. Not whether it violated the UN Charter, but what comes next for Venezuela's government. The objections happened. The consequences didn't. This reveals the mechanism. When a great power ignores international law, there's no enforcement. The system worked for decades because the US chose to operate within it. That made American power legitimate, cheaper to maintain. Trump's abandoning that approach. The constraints aren't legal anymore. They're material. Geography is constraint 1. Venezuela sits in America's backyard. The US has overwhelming military dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Russia and China can object but cannot project enough force to stop anything. The Monroe Doctrine never disappeared. Trump just stopped being polite about it. Greenland. Panama Canal. The message is explicit. Constraint 2 is leverage. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, but oil is fungible. When Venezuelan production drops, Saudi Arabia increases output. Markets adjust. More critically, Venezuela had no powerful protector willing to fight. Russia and China have interests there. Arms deals, oil contracts, but not core strategic interests worth military confrontation. This combination made Caracas work. Geographic proximity, plus limited leverage, plus no protective alliance. Keep those 3 factors in mind. Watch what happens when you change the variables. Taiwan. Everyone watching Venezuela thinks they see the pattern. The US ignored international law. China could do the same. Launch the invasion. But there's one constraint that changes everything. 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductors come from Taiwan. Not 92% of Taiwan's production. 92% globally. Chips below 7 nanometers. These run AI systems, advanced weapons, 5G networks. Every major economy depends on them, including China. China receives over half of Taiwan's chip exports. Chinese AI companies rely on chips manufactured in Taiwan. China's own semiconductor industry is years behind despite massive investment. TSMC produces 2 nanometer chips. China's most advanced domestic production sits at 7 nanometers. The reason is equipment. You need extreme ultraviolet lithography machines from ASML in the Netherlands to make cutting-edge chips. The US blocked China from buying them. Without EUV machines, China cannot catch up. Here's the paradox. China wants to control Taiwan for strategic reasons. But China also needs Taiwan's fabs operating at full capacity. An invasion that damages those facilities doesn't solve China's technology problem. It creates a catastrophic crisis. TSMC's chairman said it explicitly. If Taiwan is invaded, the fabs become inoperable. They're not standalone factories you can seize and restart. They depend on a real-time global network. Chemicals from Japan, specialized gases from Europe, ultra-pure water systems. Engineers who spent years learning one specific production line. This knowledge isn't in manuals. It's in people's heads. Even if fabs aren't physically damaged, they stop working when the supply chain breaks. The Institute for Economics and Peace estimated a Taiwan conflict would cost $10 trillion. That's what happens when 92% of advanced chip production goes offline. AI development halts. Weapon systems can't be manufactured. The automotive industry crashes. This affects China as much as anyone. The Taiwan constraint isn't moral, it's technical. Semiconductors create a dependency that cuts both ways. This is completely different from Venezuela. Oil is replaceable. Taiwan's fabs are not. Now, the scenario everyone fears: Russia and the Baltics. The assumption is Russia finishes with Ukraine, rebuilds its forces, tests NATO by seizing Baltic territory, then threatens nuclear escalation. But watch the constraint everyone's missing. It's not political will. It's military capability. A European Council on Foreign Relations analysis, published January 2026, examined Russia's actual forces. They're severely degraded from Ukraine. Equipment losses are massive. They're pulling T-62 tanks from 1960s storage because modern armor is destroyed. The timeline matters. German intelligence estimates Russia might be ready to attack NATO by 2029 at earliest. Even then, the military balance doesn't work. NATO's conventional advantage in the Baltic region is overwhelming. Finland and Sweden join NATO. The Baltic Sea is now essentially a NATO lake. Russia's Baltic fleet would operate in hostile waters, completely surrounded by NATO assets. On the ground, Estonia spends over 5% of GDP on defense, highest in NATO. Lithuania is boosting defense spending to 5.38% in 2026. Poland launched construction of a $2.5 billion defensive network. 700 kilometers of fortifications. Germany deployed a permanent brigade to Lithuania. 10,000 NATO troops are stationed in the Baltics permanently. The European Council study concluded that even with minimal US assistance, European NATO forces could halt a Russian invasion. The reason is logistics. Russia would need to move forces across 100 to 200 kilometers under constant NATO fire. They lack air cover. They lack logistics capacity after Ukraine losses. The Russian military that invaded Ukraine in February 2022 was the most capable force Russia had fielded since the Soviet collapse. That force failed to take Kyiv 80 kilometers from a friendly border. A degraded Russian military cannot occupy Baltic territory against prepared NATO defenses under air attack. It's physics. You cannot move 20,000 troops across exposed terrain without air superiority and logistics. NATO has both. Russia doesn't. So what does Venezuela actually reveal? Not that great powers can do whatever they want. The constraints are real. Venezuela shows something specific. Small states in a great power's immediate sphere, without leverage and without an alliance that will fight, face a different reality than international law promises. Maduro had international law on his side. The US violated Venezuelan sovereignty explicitly. The operation proceeded. The system registered objections, then moved on. The precedent isn't that great powers can invade anyone. It's that great powers can act in their immediate sphere against targets without critical leverage. And the international system absorbs it. The objections happen. The consequences don't. The rules-based order functioned when the US paid the costs to maintain it. Those institutions amplified American power while constraining rivals. That required the US to accept limits on its own actions. Trump abandons these constraints. This doesn't make the US more powerful. It makes American power more expensive and less predictable. Venezuela worked because costs were low and the target was weak. But the logic doesn't scale. Taiwan has the semiconductor constraint. The Baltics have NATO's conventional advantage. Every situation has different variables: geography, military balance, economic dependencies, alliance structures. The dangerous assumption is that because Venezuela worked, the same approach works everywhere. The actual vulnerability is smaller states that lack leverage. If you're in a great power sphere and can't make yourself expensive to coerce, your options narrow. You can build deterrence like the Baltics are doing. You can create dependencies like Taiwan has with semiconductors. You can align with a coalition and hope it shows up. But you cannot rely on international law. Venezuela proved the reputational costs aren't high enough to matter. The spheres of influence never left. They were ignored during the unipolar period when US power was so dominant that spheres looked like global rules. The question now is whether great powers can manage overlapping spheres in a globalized world without triggering unintended conflicts. 19th century sphere logic worked because great powers carved up regions that were economically peripheral to each other. Today's world doesn't work that way. Supply chains cross borders. Taiwan makes chips for China and America. Europe needs energy flowing through contested zones. This makes sphere logic fundamentally unstable. Venezuela succeeded because it was contained, regional, limited, a target with no leverage and no protector. The US can run that play in the Western Hemisphere. Russia might try it in Central Asia. China might try it in Southeast Asia. But none of them can run it where it matters. Not Taiwan, not the Baltics, not anywhere constraints produce costs exceeding benefits. Rules became optional for great powers inside their spheres. The constraints didn't. Geography, leverage, and alliances determine what's actually possible. Semiconductors create protection. Oil doesn't. NATO's military balance creates protection. UN resolutions don't. Venezuela didn't break the system. It revealed which parts of the system still have teeth and which parts are just words on paper.